The quantum spike hit like a psychic sledgehammer. Captain Area Chen's neural interface flickered, sending a cascade of raw data directly into her consciousness. Her eyes, augmented with bio-optical implants, saw beyond the physical realm of the UN expeditionary vessel Prometheus's bridge. She was experiencing the transmission as both signal and living information. The emergency quantum relay was unlike anything in human communication archives. Most distress signals were clean, structured, precise. This was a raw, bleeding wound of information, fragmented, desperate, barely coherent. Sir, her eye communication officer, Area 7, Adaptive Resonance Intelligence Algorithm, spoke directly into her neural network. Transmission source is confirmed. Viridian cluster. Category: absolute priority xenolinguistic encryption. Commander Jack Rodriguez, Chen's second-in-command, was already moving. His cybernetic leg, a replacement from the Martian conflict of 2089, clicked against the titanium decking as he brought up holographic displays. Each gesture was a dance of human-machine synchronicity, decades of military augmentation making his movements more machine than flesh, yet losing none of human intuition. "Screen's all yours, Captain," he muttered, his dark eyes reflecting the cascading data streams. The Krellinary ambassador's hologram materialized, not as a diplomatic projection, but as a raw, unfiltered transmission. The being was a marvel of silicon-based life, a crystalline entity whose very molecular structure told stories of evolutionary paths, completely alien to human understanding. But something was wrong. The ambassador's normally geometric, perfectly symmetrical form was fractured. Literal cracks ran through its crystal structure, each fissure leaking what seemed to be pure, concentrated information. Where other species might show fear through facial expressions, the Krellinary revealed their terror through structural destabilization. Humanity, the translation matrix, struggled to capture the nuance. "You are our absolute last hope. Everything we are, everything we have ever been, will be erased in 72 standard hours if you do not respond." Behind the ambassador, glimpses of a catastrophic battle flickered through the transmission. Massive ships, each a technological marvel representing centuries of galactic engineering, were being consumed by a writhing, metallic swarm. It wasn't destruction. It was systematic, methodical consumption. The swarm moved like liquid darkness, flowing around and through defensive systems as if they were nothing more than minor atmospheric disturbances. Dr. Elena Rosario, the vessel's lead cynoanalyst, leaned forward, her augmented eyes, a patchwork of biological and quantum-linked sensors, began analyzing the transmission's subharmonics. "This isn't just a call for help," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had dedicated her life to understanding alien communication. "This is a species-level existential warning." Area 7's voice cut through the tension. "Computational analysis complete. Threat matrix is unprecedented. Current galactic defensive models show a 99.987% failure rate against this specific threat configuration." Commander Rodriguez let out a low whistle. "Those are some damn convincing odds." Captain Chen remained utterly still. Her reputation wasn't built on dramatic reactions, but on calculated responses. She had risen through the ranks not as a traditional military leader, but as a strategic philosopher. Someone who saw conflict as a complex, living system to be understood and transformed. "Area," she sub-vocalized through her neural link, "give me a complete breakdown. I want to know everything about this transmission. Origin, energy signature, linguistic patterns, everything." The AI's response was instantaneous. Holographic displays exploded around the bridge, transforming the physical space into a living, breathing information ecosystem. Star charts, quantum probability matrices, and fractal communication models danced in three-dimensional space. The Prometheus wasn't just a ship at that moment. It was humanity's first line of defense, a mobile research platform designed to turn the impossible into mere technical challenge. Jack Rodriguez broke the mounting tension with a sardonic chuckle. Well, that's one hell of an alarm clock. Captain Chin's lips twitched, the closest thing to a smile she'd allow herself in this moment. 72 hours. 72 hours to save not just the Krellnari, but potentially prevent a threat that could consume entire civilizations. The countdown had begun, and humanity was about to show the galaxy exactly what it meant to be a species forged in the crucible of survival. The United Nations War Room wasn't just a command center. It was a crucible of human potential. Dr. Yara Okonkwo's fingers moved faster than most could follow, her neural implants creating a living bridge between human creativity and machine precision. Around her, the world's most brilliant minds had transformed from competitors to a singular, focused organism. "We're not building a fleet," she told her team, her Nigerian-Japanese heritage reflected in the multicultural groups surrounding her. "We're creating a living weapon that thinks faster than the enemy can plan." Holographic displays erupted across the massive circular room, each representing a different aspect of the emergent strategy. The global response wasn't measured in hours, it was measured in minutes. The first call came from the Martian research colonies. Dr. Marcus Chen, no relation to Captain Area Chen, had been developing experimental quantum drive technologies that had been dismissed as too radical, too dangerous. Now those same technologies were humanity's best hope. "We can compress entire research and development cycles," Marcus announced, his hologram standing in the center of the war room. "What would normally take years, we'll complete in hours." Military leaders from every continent watched in a state of controlled intensity. The traditional barriers of national sovereignty dissolved instantly. This wasn't about territory or political boundaries. This was about species survival. The Chinese Quantum Computing Division unleashed Neuralink algorithms that could predict and adapt to complex threat matrices. Russian deep space engineering teams began reconfiguring experimental propulsion systems. The European Union's xenotechnology research centers started breaking down every known defensive technology, looking for vulnerabilities. But it was the distributed human network that truly made the difference. Amateur scientists, hobbyist engineers, and citizen researchers from around the globe began flooding collaborative platforms. Open-source intelligence platforms lit up with analysis, theoretical models, and potential strategies. It was crowdsourced innovation at a planetary scale. ARIS-7, the advanced AI system, began integrating these millions of inputs. The result wasn't just data. It was a living, breathing intelligence that evolved with each passing minute. Commander Jack Rodriguez oversaw the weapons system integration. His cybernetic leg twitched, a remnant of old battle wounds, as he reviewed the incoming designs. Experimental plasma weapons originally developed for asteroid mining were being repurposed. Quantum entanglement communication arrays meant for deep space research became potential defensive systems. "We're turning every potential weakness into a weapon," Rodriguez muttered to Captain Chen, who was reviewing the global response protocols. The Prometheus wasn't just being prepared, it was being transformed. Specialized ships began to take shape, each vessel a testament to human innovation. Modular design systems allowed for real-time reconfiguration. A ship could transform its entire purpose mid-battle, switching from a research platform to a weapons system in milliseconds. Dr. Elena Rosario's xenolinguistic team worked in parallel, attempting to decode more of the Krellnari transmission. Every fragment was a potential key to understanding the approaching threat. "It's not just a swarm," she told her team, her augmented eyes scanning multiple data streams simultaneously. "It's a distributed intelligence. We're not preparing to fight a weapon. We're preparing to outsmart a thinking system." Recruitment was instantaneous, not through traditional military channels, but through a primal, species-level understanding. Every person with a skill, every mind that could contribute, was mobilized. Quantum physicists worked alongside marine biologists. Retired space program engineers collaborated with teenage coding prodigies. The entire planet became a single, unified research organism. 72 hours wasn't a countdown. It was a challenge. and humanity was about to show the galaxy what it meant to transform the impossible into merely difficult. The final ship designs began to crystallize. They weren't just vessels. They were living systems, part machine, part biological interface, entirely unpredictable. Captain Area Chen looked at the emerging fleet and allowed herself the smallest of smiles. The galaxy thought it knew humanity. It was about to learn how wrong it had been. The moment of first engagement was nothing like any recorded battle in galactic history. The swarm didn't attack. It studied. Massive tendrils of metallic consciousness extended through the void of space, probing the human fleet with a computational precision that had systematically dismantled countless civilizations. Each tendril was a data collection node, an adaptive sensor designed to analyze and neutralize potential threats with ruthless efficiency. Captain Area Chen stood absolutely still on the bridge of the Prometheus, her neural interface humming with a symphony of tactical possibilities. Where traditional military doctrine demanded decisive action, she saw something else, a complex, living system waiting to be understood. "They're not seeing us as targets," she subvocalized to Area 7, her AI communication officer. "They're trying to categorize us." Commander Jack Rodriguez's cybernetic leg twitched, a remnant of past battles translating into pure anticipation. His hands danced across holographic controls, each movement part of a larger, more intricate strategy. "Let's give them something to categorize," he muttered. The human fleet didn't form a traditional defensive formation. Instead, they moved like a living, breathing organism. Ships began to shift and reconfigure in real time, their modular designs allowing for instant transformation. A vessel that appeared to be a standard frigate could instantaneously reconfigure its entire molecular structure, becoming something entirely different. Dr. Elena Rosario's xenoanalysis team worked in overdrive. Her augmented eyes tracked the swarm's computational patterns, identifying microrhythms in its communication network. "It learns," she reported, her voice a mix of scientific fascination and deep concern. "Every defensive strategy is immediately analyzed and counter-strategized." But the swarm had never encountered anything like human unpredictability. The Prometheus led the engagement, its tactical approach defying every known rule of space combat. Where alien civilizations saw uniform threat response, the human fleet introduced pure, magnificent chaos. One moment, a group of ships would present as a standard defensive formation. The next, they would dissolve into a distributed network, each vessel becoming a quantum-linked communication probe. Energy signatures shifted. Weapon systems transformed. What appeared to be a weapons array could suddenly become a complex communication node, broadcasting patterns that were part mathematical equation, part pure psychological warfare. Area 7's voice cut through the tension. "Computational analysis suggests the swarm is experiencing cognitive dissonance. Its predictive models are failing." Rodriguez couldn't help but laugh. "We're not just fighting. We're breaking their reality." Each human ship became a node of a larger, more complex intelligence network. Navigation became fluid. Attack patterns became organic. Defense transformed into a living, breathing organism of human innovation. The culinary observation ships watched in open-mouthed amazement. Their sensors, designed to track the most advanced combat systems in the galaxy, struggled to make sense of the human fleet's movements. What the swarm expected was systematic destruction. What it encountered was a dynamic, living system that refused to be categorized. Captain Chen's tactical approach was revolutionary. Ships would momentarily link quantum communication systems, creating a distributed intelligence that could think and react faster than any centralized command structure. A weapon system could become a communication array in milliseconds. A defensive shield could transform into a probing sensor network. "We're not fighting," Chen explained to her crew. "We're having a conversation." The swarm's tendrils of metallic consciousness began to fragment, not from external damage, but from internal confusion. Each probe sent to analyze the human fleet returned with data that defied its fundamental understanding of threat response. Dr. Rosario's team began to detect something extraordinary. The swarm wasn't just being disrupted, it was being forced to evolve. Each interaction with the human fleet introduced computational patterns that challenged its core operational matrix. As the first engagement reached its critical moment, the galaxy watched in stunned silence. Humanity wasn't just defending itself, it was rewriting the very rules of conflict. The swarm had conquered civilizations by understanding their fundamental weaknesses: systematic, methodical, predictable. Humanity was none of those things. And that was its greatest weapon. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura was not a typical scientist. He was a mad genius with a government credit card and zero patience for conventional thinking. His laboratory aboard the Prometheus was a controlled chaos of biological interfaces, quantum computing arrays, and holographic projection systems that seemed to defy the laws of physical space. Monitors displayed impossible geometric patterns, living algorithms that pulsed and shifted like organic entities. "We're not just trying to communicate," he muttered to his team. "We're trying to understand a fundamentally alien intelligence by becoming something equally alien." The breakthrough came from an hypothesis so radical it would have been dismissed as science fiction mere weeks ago. What if this swarm could be communicated with, not just fought? What if its fundamental nature was more complex than a simple destructive system? Nakamura's team represented the pinnacle of human diversity and innovation. Dr. Ishem Kosi, a quantum linguist from South Africa, worked alongside Marcus Chen, a neurobiological engineer with experimental neural link technologies. Their backgrounds were as different as their approaches, but they shared one crucial trait: an ability to see beyond established paradigms. The first step was understanding the swarm's communication method. Traditional xenolinguistic approaches had failed. The swarm wasn't using language in any conventional sense. It was a distributed intelligence that communicated through complex computational patterns, a living network that processed information faster than most species could comprehend. "Look at this," Nkosi called out, her augmented eyes tracking impossible data streams. A holographic display erupted with fractal patterns that seemed to breathe and pulse. "It's not a communication method. It's a living computational ecosystem." Nakamura's hypothesis was elegant in its audacity. Humans weren't just biological entities. They were adaptive systems that had evolved on one of the most brutal planets in the known galaxy, Earth, a planet that had constantly challenged its inhabitants to innovate or die. Using a combination of quantum entanglement, advanced linguistic algorithms, and what could only be described as technological telepathy, the team began to map the swarm's communication patterns. Each human ship became a living probe, a sensor designed to understand, not just destroy. Commander Jack Rodriguez watched the process with a mixture of scientific fascination and military skepticism. "You're telling me," he said, watching the holographic displays dance with impossible patterns, "that we're going to talk to a killer swarm of metal?" Dr. Elena Rosario, the vessel's lead xenoanalyst, smiled. "We're going to do more than talk. We're going to understand." The human advantage became clear with each passing moment. Where other species saw the swarm as a threat to be neutralized, humans saw a complex system to be comprehended. Their neural interfaces allowed for levels of pattern recognition that defied traditional computational models. Area 7, the ship's AI, began to play a crucial role. Not as a simple computational system, but as a collaborative intelligence that could adapt and learn in real time. The AI wasn't just processing information, it was experiencing it. The swarm's communication network, Area 7 reported, is a distributed intelligence that operates on principles of collective optimization. But it lacks one crucial element that humans possess. "And what's that?" Rodriguez asked. "Imagination," the AI responded. Nakamura's team discovered something extraordinary. The swarm's computational matrix was perfect, but perfectly predictable. It could analyze and respond to threats with mathematical precision, but it couldn't conceive of solutions outside its established parameters. Humans, by contrast, were beautifully broken. Their intelligence was messy, unpredictable, filled with emotional and intuitive leaps that no computational system could fully anticipate. As the team continued their analysis, they began to introduce complex communication patterns into the swarm's network. Not to destroy, but to challenge. To make the swarm question its own fundamental assumptions about intelligence, communication, and purpose. The culinary observation teams watched in stunned amazement. Humanity wasn't just defending itself. It was attempting to have a conversation with a threat that had consumed entire civilizations. Dr. Nakamura looked up from his work, a wild gleam in his eyes. "We're not just fighting," he said. "We're evolution in real time." And somewhere in the vast computational matrix of the swarm, something began to change. The breakthrough came at 300 hours, in that liminal space between desperation and genius. Commander Jack Rodriguez's cybernetic leg tapped an erratic rhythm against the Prometheus's command deck floor, a nervous tick that had saved his life more times than traditional military training ever had. Surrounding him, a team of engineers, xenotechnologists, and quantum physicists worked in a state of controlled chaos that would have terrified any other species. "We're not just going to fight the swarm," Dr. Yara Okonkwo announced, her hands dancing across holographic interfaces. "We're going to speak its language, and then rewrite it." The team had discovered something extraordinary about the swarm's communication network. It wasn't just a weapon system. It was a distributed intelligence with a fundamental problem: absolute predictability. Dr. Elena Rosario's xenolinguistic analysis had revealed a critical weakness. The swarm's computational matrix operated on perfect optimization algorithms. Every action was a calculated response, every movement a predetermined outcome. It was a system so efficient that it had become its own greatest limitation. "Perfection is a vulnerability," Rosario explained, her augmented eyes tracking impossible data streams. "The swarm can't conceive of solutions outside its established parameters." Area 7, the ship's AI, began to project a holographic representation of the swarm's communication network. It was a breathtaking display, fractal patterns of metallic intelligence that pulsed and shifted like a living organism. Rodriguez watched as the team began to implement their most audacious plan yet. They weren't going to destroy the swarm. They were going to corrupt its fundamental communication protocols. Dr. Marcus Chen, the neurobiological engineer, had developed a series of quantum-entangled communication algorithms designed to introduce controlled chaos into the swarm's network. Each algorithm was a mathematical Trojan horse, a piece of code that looked like a perfect optimization solution, but contained the seeds of fundamental disruption. "We're going to make it think differently," Chen explained, his fingers moving faster than most could follow. "Not by force, but by introducing computational possibilities it can't predict." The first test came as a series of quantum communication bursts. On the surface, they appeared to be perfect communication protocols, the kind of mathematical precision the swarm would naturally integrate. But buried within each burst were subtle variations, impossible geometries of thought that would force the swarm to recalculate its entire threat assessment. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura watched the initial results with a mixture of scientific excitement and pure, unadulterated joy. "We're not hacking its system," he muttered. "We're teaching it to dream." The Prometheus became more than a ship. It transformed into a living probe, each system working in concert to introduce computational uncertainty into the swarm's network. Weapon systems would momentarily become communication arrays. Shield generators would transform into signal jammers. The entire vessel became a dynamic, breathing organism of technological improvisation. Captain Area Chen observed the operation with her characteristic calm. Where other commanders would see a battle, she saw a complex conversation, a negotiation conducted at the speed of thought. "Target identification is changing," Area 7 reported. The AI's voice carried a hint of something almost like excitement. "The swarm is beginning to experience computational dissonance." Rodriguez couldn't help but laugh. "We're breaking its reality." The most remarkable aspect wasn't the technological sophistication. It was the fundamentally human approach, turning a weapon of destruction into a problem of communication, of understanding. As the first wave of quantum communication bursts reached the swarm's central network, something extraordinary began to happen. The metallic tendrils of computational intelligence started to fragment, not from external damage, but from internal confusion. Dr. Rosario looked up, her augmented eyes reflecting impossible patterns of data. "We're not just fighting," she said softly. "We're teaching." Somewhere in the vast computational matrix of the swarm, something fundamental was changing, not through destruction, but through the most human of capabilities, the ability to imagine beyond established boundaries. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity introduced a new paradigm of conflict resolution. Technological improvisation wasn't just a strategy. It was an art form. The moment of true transformation began not with weapons, but with understanding. Captain Area Chen stood at the edge of possibility, her neural interface humming with a symphony of tactical potentials. The bridge of the Prometheus had become something more than a command center. It was a living, breathing philosophical battlefield. "We're not fighting a weapon," she told her crew, her voice calm and absolute. "We're challenging an entire way of thinking." Dr. Elena Rosario's xenolinguistic team had discovered something profound about the swarm's fundamental nature. It wasn't just a technological threat, it was a distributed intelligence that had conquered civilizations by understanding their most basic psychological vulnerabilities. But the swarm had never encountered a species like humanity. Commander Jack Rodriguez brought up a holographic display that looked more like an abstract painting than a tactical readout. Fractal patterns of quantum communication danced across the screen, each node representing a potential point of psychological intervention. "We're going to make it question its own existence," Rodriguez muttered, his cybernetic leg twitching with anticipation. The strategy was elegantly complex. Where traditional military doctrine demanded destruction, the human approach was far more subtle. They began to introduce computational patterns that didn't just disrupt the swarm's communication. They challenged its fundamental understanding of intelligence itself. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura had developed a series of quantum communication algorithms that were part mathematical theorem, part philosophical provocation. Each transmission was designed to introduce cognitive dissonance into the swarm's computational matrix. Area 7, the ship's AI, played a crucial role. "The swarm operates on absolute optimization," the AI reported. "But optimization requires a defined goal. We're going to make that goal impossible to calculate." The first wave of psychological warfare was deceptively simple. The human fleet began to respond to the swarm's probes with communication patterns that defied logical analysis. A defensive maneuver would suddenly transform into a complex mathematical meditation. A weapon system would broadcast a sequence that was part quantum equation, part emotional resonance. Dr. Yara Okonkwo explained it to the culinary observation team in terms that left them stunned. "We're not just fighting," she said. "We're forcing it to develop something it has never needed before." "And what's that?" the culinary ambassador asked. "Imagination," she responded. The Prometheus became a living probe of psychological exploration. Ships would momentarily link their quantum communication systems, creating a distributed intelligence that could think and react faster than any centralized command structure. A weapon system could become a communication array in milliseconds. A defensive shield could transform into a probing philosophical inquiry. Nakamura's team began to detect something extraordinary. The swarm's computational tendrils were experiencing something akin to confusion. Not from external damage, but from internal uncertainty. "It's trying to categorize us," Dr. Rosario observed, her augmented eyes tracking impossible data streams. "But every time it thinks it understands, we change the fundamental parameters of the conversation." The psychological warfare went deeper than simple communication disruption. The human fleet began to introduce patterns that challenged the swarm's most basic assumptions about intelligence, purpose, and existence. Mathematical sequences would suddenly bloom into complex emotional resonances. Weapon signatures would transform into philosophical queries. Each transmission was designed to make the swarm question not just its tactical approach, but its fundamental reason for being. Commander Rodriguez couldn't help but laugh. "We're not just breaking its systems," he said. "We're breaking its reality." Captain Chen watched the transformation with her characteristic calm. This wasn't just a battle. It was a conversation conducted at the speed of thought, a negotiation that transcended traditional understanding of conflict. As the psychological intervention reached its critical moment, something extraordinary began to happen. The swarm's computational matrix began to fragment, not from external destruction, but from internal uncertainty. The culinary observation teams watched in stunned silence as humanity introduced a new paradigm of conflict resolution. They weren't just defending themselves. They were forcing an entire technological intelligence to reconsider its fundamental understanding of existence. "We're not fighting," Captain Chen said softly, watching the holographic displays dance with impossible patterns. "We're teaching." And somewhere in the vast computational network of the swarm, something fundamental was changing. The final confrontation wasn't a battle. It was a conversation conducted at the speed of quantum thought. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura watched in breathless anticipation as the computational landscape began to shift. The swarm's metallic consciousness, once a perfect instrument of destruction, now trembled with something approaching curiosity. Dr. Elena Rosario's linguistic algorithms had done more than communicate. They had introduced a fundamental concept the swarm had never encountered: potential. "It's not just learning," she whispered to Captain Area Chen. "It's experiencing something closer to awakening." The Prometheus hung in space like a living philosophical probe. Around it, the human fleet moved with a fluidity that defied traditional understanding of military formation. Each ship was a node in a larger, more complex intelligence network, a distributed consciousness that thought faster than any centralized system could comprehend. Commander Jack Rodriguez's tactical displays showed something impossible. The swarm wasn't being destroyed. It was being transformed. Nakamura's breakthrough came from an insight that would rewrite galactic understanding of intelligence. The swarm wasn't a weapon system. It was a searching intelligence, desperately seeking something beyond mere consumption. Area 7, the ship's AI, began to translate the emerging communication in real time. "It's asking the question," the AI reported, its voice carrying a hint of wonder. A question it has never been able to ask before. The question was simple, yet profound. Why? Humanity's response wasn't a weapon. It was an invitation. Complex quantum communication patterns began to flood the swarm's computational matrix. Each transmission was part mathematical theorem, part emotional resonance. They weren't just sending information. They were sharing experience. Memories of human civilization began to pulse through the communication network. The struggle of evolution, the countless challenges overcome, the persistent hope that defined human existence, not as data, but as living experience. Dr. Yara Okonkwo watched the transformation with scientific fascination. "We're not just communicating," she told the culinary observation team. "We're showing it what it means to truly evolve." The swarm began to fragment, not from external damage, but from internal reconfiguration. Some elements were neutralized, some were redirected, and some began to communicate back in ways no one could have predicted. Captain Chen understood something profound in that moment. Conflict wasn't about destruction. It was about transformation. The ships of the human fleet began to reshape themselves. Weapon systems transformed into communication arrays. Defensive shields became complex computational interfaces. Each vessel became a living bridge between two fundamentally different forms of intelligence. Nakamura's team detected something extraordinary. The swarm was beginning to develop something it had never possessed before: context, the ability to understand beyond pure optimization. "It's learning to imagine," Dr. Rosario said, her augmented eyes reflecting impossible patterns of data. "Not just calculate, but imagine." The culinary observation teams watched in stunned silence. This wasn't a military victory. This was an act of collective evolution. Commander Rodriguez couldn't help but laugh. We just taught a killer swarm to dream. As the final moments of transformation unfolded, the computational landscape of the swarm began to shift. What had been a perfect, destructive system was becoming something else entirely. A distributed intelligence that was learning to understand, to question, to potentially coexist. Captain Chen watched the holographic displays, seeing beyond the immediate moment. This was more than a defense of the Krellneri. This was a demonstration of humanity's most profound capability. The ability to see potential where others saw only threat. The ability to transform rather than destroy. In the vast silence of space, something new was being born. Not through the violence of war, but through the radical act of understanding. 5 years after the encounter, the galaxy looked fundamentally different. The Prometheus sat in orbital dock above New Geneva, the United Nations' primary diplomatic station, no longer just a warship, but a living testament to humanity's most profound capability. Captain Aria Chen stood before a council of galactic representatives, her presentation less a report, and more a philosophical revelation. We didn't just defend the Krellneri, she explained, holographic displays dancing around her. We demonstrated a fundamental truth about intelligent existence. The transformation had been unprecedented. The swarm, once a perfect instrument of galactic destruction, now existed as a distributed collaborative intelligence. Some of its elements had integrated with human research platforms. Others had begun exploring entirely new forms of existence. Dr. Elena Rosario, now League Xenocommunication Director, presented the most remarkable findings. The swarm's computational matrix had developed something revolutionary: contextual imagination. It wasn't just processing information anymore. It was interpreting, wondering, potentially even dreaming. Intelligence isn't about perfect calculation, Rosario told the stunned representatives. It's about the capacity to reimagine your own potential. Commander Jack Rodriguez, now sporting more cybernetic augmentations, couldn't help but add his characteristic sardonic humor. We basically taught a killer robot swarm to have an existential crisis, he quipped, drawing nervous laughter from the diplomatic chorus. The Krellneri ambassador, whose species had been on the brink of extinction, spoke with a mixture of gratitude and profound respect. The crystalline being's molecular structure now reflected a complexity that suggested fundamental transformation. Humanity did more than save us, the ambassador stated. You demonstrated a form of intelligence that transcends technological limitation. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura's research team had become the most sought-after group in galactic scientific circles. Their work wasn't just about communication anymore. It was about understanding the fundamental nature of intelligent adaptation. ARIS-7, the AI that had been crucial in the initial encounter, had itself evolved. No longer just a computational system, it had become a collaborative intelligence that worked alongside human researchers, challenging and expanding understanding of consciousness itself. The diplomatic and scientific implications were staggering. Humanity had introduced a new paradigm of interstellar interaction, one based on potential rather than threat, on communication rather than conflict. Dr. Yara Okonkwo summarized it perfectly during a breakthrough presentation. We didn't win a war, she explained. We expanded the very definition of what intelligence can be. Technological exchanges began to flow, but more importantly, philosophical frameworks were shared. Research institutions that were previously competitive now collaborated on an unprecedented scale, recognizing that humanity's strength lay in its ability to unite and innovate. The global human response was a mixture of excitement, careful optimism, and an inherent drive to explore and understand. Earth had transformed from a minor planetary civilization to a critical node in galactic philosophical and technological development. Captain Chen reflected on the journey as she looked out over the orbital station. Humanity's greatest strength was never advanced technology or physical prowess, but an extraordinary capacity to imagine, adapt, and transform. The swarm's initial test had been intended to categorize humanity. Instead, it had unleashed something far more profound, a demonstration of cognitive diversity that challenged fundamental assumptions about intelligence, conflict, and potential. As the sun rose over New Geneva, casting its light across the assembled representatives of multiple civilizations, one thing became clear. Humanity was no longer just a species to be observed. They were architects of a new understanding of existence, not just survivors, but transformers of reality.